He was paid to watch over a dangerous Apache woman, but when he saw her, he knew he had to set her free. Samuel was a young man who knew the desert and the plains better than most. He had grown up near the edge of the wild lands, where the sun burned the earth during the day and the cold bit through the nights. From an early age, he had learned to ride, to track animals, and to survive on what the land offered. His skills had earned him a reputation among the traders and settlers who passed through, and many trusted him to take on difficult tasks in dangerous areas. One morning, a man named Thomas, a wealthy trader from the town, approached Samuel with an unusual job. He had a woman in his custody, described as a dangerous Apache, and he needed someone to transport her safely across the land to another settlement where the authorities would deal with her. Thomas was a serious man, with a sharp gaze and little patience for mistakes. He handed Samuel a small sack of coins and a list of instructions, emphasizing repeatedly that the woman was strong, clever, and should not be underestimated. "You will be paid well, but do not let your guard down," Thomas said, his voice low and grave. "She is known to be dangerous. Do not let her escape. Keep her chained and under control at all times." Samuel nodded, taking the responsibility seriously. He had handled difficult situations before, but this one felt different. There was something in Thomas's tone, a mix of fear and respect, that made Samuel wonder if the stories about this woman were exaggerated. He reminded himself that he was experienced and that his skills would be enough to keep her under control. The next day, Samuel met the woman for the first time. She was seated in a small cart, her hands bound with leather straps, her posture upright and calm. At first glance, she seemed ordinary, yet there was a fire in her eyes that immediately caught Samuel's attention. Her hair was dark and tied back neatly, and her face carried a quiet dignity that made it clear she had endured many challenges in her life. She looked at him steadily, without fear, and in that moment, Samuel felt a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. He noticed that she did not speak immediately. She simply observed him as he secured the horses and prepared the route. He could see her strength in the way she held herself, and it became clear that Thomas's warnings about her cleverness were not unfounded. She was alert, intelligent, and aware of everything happening around her. As they began their journey, the landscape unfolded in a mix of rugged mountains, dry plains, and dense woods. The air was crisp in the morning and harsh under the sun. Samuel rode alongside the cart, keeping an eye on both the path and the woman. He realized quickly that the stories of her danger were only part of the truth. She was not violent without reason, and there was no sign of aggression in her manner. Instead, there was a quiet strength, a sharp awareness, and a calm determination that seemed to command respect. During the first few hours of travel, Samuel kept a careful distance, observing her silently. She did not complain or make unnecessary movements, but her eyes scanned the horizon constantly. Occasionally she spoke, but her words were few and deliberate. She asked about the path, the weather, and the animals they might encounter. Samuel answered with simple explanations, noticing how she listened carefully and responded with thoughtfulness. There was a wisdom in her words, a practical understanding of the land and the dangers it held. As the day progressed, Samuel felt a growing sense of unease about the nature of his task. He had been paid to guard her, to treat her as a prisoner, but he began to see her as something more, someone who had been misunderstood and unfairly judged. He thought about the stories of Apache women he had heard as a child, strong, brave, and deeply connected to their people and the land. In those stories, they were not simply dangerous. They were survivors, fighters, and leaders in their own right. By the second day of travel, Samuel found himself noticing small details about her that further challenged his perception. He saw how carefully she treated the horses, gently brushing them and speaking softly to them. He noticed her hands, strong but precise, able to tie knots, handle tools, and manage small tasks with ease. She observed the environment, identifying safe water sources, areas where the ground was firm, and signs of wild animals nearby. Every action showed skill and intelligence, not recklessness or danger. Samuel began to question whether the danger truly lay with her, or with those who had decided she must be controlled. The coins he had been given, the warnings, and the authority he carried all seemed less important than the realization that she was a human being with dignity and strength. Each night, as they camped under the stars, he watched her move quietly around the campfire, tending to the horses and checking their supplies. She spoke rarely, but when she did, it was with clarity and thoughtfulness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Samuel and the woman set up camp near a small creek. The sound of flowing water filled the quiet evening, and the air cooled pleasantly. Samuel sat a few feet from her, sharpening a knife and preparing food. She watched him silently, her eyes calm and observant, yet there was no hostility, only awareness. For the first time, Samuel felt a connection beyond the simple task of guarding her. He wondered about her life, her family, and the challenges she had faced to survive in a world that seemed determined to misunderstand her. He thought about the townspeople who had labeled her dangerous without knowing her, the authorities who had decided she must be sent away, and the traitor who had handed her to him as if she were only an object. The injustice of it weighed on him heavily. That night, as he lay under the stars listening to the wind, Samuel made a quiet decision in his heart. He would not treat her as merely a prisoner. He would observe her, understand her, and perhaps even find a way to help her. He did not know exactly how he would do it, but the feeling was strong. A sense that he could not simply follow orders blindly when he had witnessed her strength, her intelligence, and her humanity. In those early hours of night, Samuel understood something important. Courage was not always shown through aggression or force. Sometimes it was shown through survival, through intelligence, and through the ability to maintain dignity under pressure. The woman in the cart embodied all of these qualities, and Samuel felt both admiration and responsibility. By the time dawn broke, casting pale light over the hills, he had resolved to watch her not as a prisoner, but as a person deserving of freedom and respect. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he felt a new sense of purpose. The task he had been hired for was clear, yet the truth he now understood was more important. He would need to be careful, observant, and patient, but he could no longer ignore what he had seen. Samuel mounted his horse, checking the cart and the woman inside. She looked at him briefly, her eyes sharp and calm, and he nodded slightly in acknowledgement. There was no need for words. Both of them understood that the journey ahead would be difficult, that the land was harsh, and that danger could appear at any moment. But there was also an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of strength, intelligence, and the possibility of trust. As they rode into the rising sun, Samuel's thoughts remained with the woman. He had been paid to guard her, but in truth, he had already begun to see her as someone who deserved more than confinement. And deep inside, he knew that he would find a way to act on that realization, even if it meant taking risks he had never imagined before. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, filled with challenges but also possibilities. Samuel kept his eyes on the horizon, his mind alert, and his heart quietly determined. For the first time, the duty of the job and the call of justice aligned in his thoughts. He did not yet know how he would free her, but he knew this. From the moment he saw her, he could not let her be treated unfairly. He would protect her, not as a prisoner, but as a person with a right to live with dignity. The journey had begun, and with it, a story of courage, understanding, and quiet rebellion against injustice, one that would test both Samuel and the woman he had been hired to watch over. The second day of the journey began with a cool breeze brushing over the plains. Samuel rose before sunrise, careful not to disturb the woman in the cart. She had slept lightly, her posture still alert even in rest. He admired her strength quietly, how she could survive the harsh desert nights without complaint, without fear. He had seen many travelers crumble under the sun and cold, but she remained steady, poised, and calm. As the horses were fed and watered, Samuel considered the path ahead. The trail led through rocky hills and a narrow canyon, areas known for sudden storms and hidden dangers. He had made this trip before, but never with a passenger like her. Every decision now mattered more, every movement could be a moment of trust or mistrust. Once the cart was ready, they set off. The woman remained quiet, but Samuel noticed how she observed every detail. The movement of birds in the sky, the distant rumble of the wind through the rocks, even the way the shadows shifted as the sun rose. Her eyes were sharp, always alert, but there was no anger or malice in them. Instead, there was focus, patience, and a calm understanding of the land. They rode for hours without speaking. Samuel respected the silence, recognizing it as part of her strength. When words were spoken, they were simple and necessary. She asked about water sources ahead and the direction of the wind. Samuel responded with clear answers, noting that she listened carefully and remembered everything. She never made demands, never complained, and never wasted energy on idle talk. Every action was deliberate, calculated, and careful, a clear sign of intelligence and experience. Around midday, the sun climbed high, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The heat pressed down, and Samuel could feel the dryness in his throat. He knew they needed to rest soon, but the canyon ahead could be dangerous if left unobserved. The woman noticed his tension without him speaking. She pointed out a small shaded area beside a dry creek, barely visible from the main path, where they could rest safely. Samuel was surprised. Her observation had saved them from a possible exposure to the sun and wind. They stopped, unhitching the horses and setting up a brief camp. The woman moved gracefully, unchained for a moment to tend to her own needs while keeping her distance from the animals. Samuel watched quietly. She carried herself with confidence, her movements smooth and purposeful. There was no hint of the dangerous person the traders had warned him about. Instead, he saw someone who had adapted to the harshness of the land, someone who could survive where others would fail. While the horses rested, Samuel brought out their small meal. He offered her some, but she shook her head politely. Instead, she watched him eat, her eyes tracking his every action. There was a quiet respect between them forming, an understanding that neither fully voiced but both felt. Samuel realized that this connection, small as it was important. Trust was fragile, especially in a world where most people judged her without knowing her story. After the short break, they continued. The path led through a narrow pass between high cliffs, a place where rocks could shift unexpectedly and where wild animals often hunted. Samuel kept close, watching both the trail and the woman. She walked beside the cart now, her steps sure and steady. Every once in a while, she would glance at him with a look that seemed to say, "I know what I am doing. I can handle this." As they moved deeper into the pass, a sudden sound echoed off the cliffs, a small herd of deer startled by something unseen. The horses tensed, and Samuel had to calm them quickly. The woman reacted immediately, guiding one of the smaller horses away from danger with careful, deliberate gestures. Samuel was impressed by her quick thinking. He had been trained to respond to danger, but she did so calmly and efficiently without panic or hesitation. By the time they reached a sheltered bend in the canyon, the sun was beginning its descent. Samuel decided it was time to set up camp for the night. The woman helped quietly, arranging stones for a small fire while he gathered wood. She moved with precision, her hands working expertly, showing knowledge and skill born from years of survival. Samuel noticed how her eyes never wandered. They were always aware, always assessing the environment. He realized that the danger she had been accused of was not inherent in her character. The real danger, he thought, might be in those who could not see her intelligence, her courage, and her skill. Night came quickly, and the sky turned a deep indigo, sprinkled with countless stars. Samuel and the woman sat by the fire, the warmth cutting through the chill. She spoke for the first time in hours, asking about the towns they had passed and the people who lived there. Her questions were simple, but her tone was curious and thoughtful. Samuel answered carefully, mindful of his words, yet feeling a strange sense of camaraderie growing. They shared no stories of past lives, no personal details. But the silence between them was comfortable, and the small firelight reflected in her eyes, revealing a mixture of intelligence and resilience that Samuel could not ignore. He thought about the unfair judgment she had faced, about the label of dangerous that had been applied to her simply because she was strong, capable, and different. That night, as Samuel lay under his blanket and watched the fire's glow flicker against the rocks, he considered what he had learned. The woman was not a threat in the way Thomas had described. She was alert, smart, and capable, but she was also human, someone who deserved fairness, respect, and the freedom to live without unjust confinement. The more he observed her, the more he felt the weight of the responsibility he carried. The coins he had been paid, the warnings, and the instructions all seemed secondary to the truth he now understood. He also thought about his own life. He had spent years surviving the desert, following rules set by traders and settlers, taking jobs for pay without much question. But now, facing the reality of what he had been asked to do, he realized that some rules were wrong. Some laws and orders could not be followed blindly. There was a difference between duty and justice, and he began to see that he might have to choose justice, even if it came at a cost. As the night deepened, a soft wind blew through the canyon. The woman moved quietly, tending to the horses and ensuring they were comfortable. Samuel watched her, feeling both admiration and a sense of responsibility. He did not fully understand her past or the reasons she had been labeled dangerous. But he knew one thing clearly. She had strength, skill, and dignity that could not be ignored or confined unfairly. Sleep eventually came, though lightly, as both remained alert to the sounds of the night. Samuel dreamed of the desert paths, of the hidden dangers, and of the woman's steady eyes. He woke at dawn with a renewed determination. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he knew he could not treat her merely as a prisoner. The connection that had quietly formed during the day and night was a reminder of his responsibility, not only to follow orders, but to act rightly, to protect her, and perhaps even to help her find the freedom she deserved. By the time the sun rose, Samuel had made a quiet plan in his mind. He would continue the journey, observing her closely, learning from her actions, and carefully considering the choices he would have to make. Each step forward was not just a step along the trail, but a step toward understanding, empathy, and courage. The desert, once only a place of survival, had become a testing ground for character, judgment, and the quiet strength that could be found in human connection. The second day ended with a growing sense of mutual respect. The woman remained calm and aware, while Samuel's admiration and sense of responsibility grew stronger. The journey was far from over, but both had begun to understand the true challenge, navigating not just the harsh land, but the difficult choices of right and wrong, freedom and control, trust and judgment. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and wildflowers. Samuel stirred before dawn, careful not to wake the woman, though he knew she was already awake. He could see the shadows of her figure in the dim light, moving quietly to tend to the horses. Her movements were precise, calm, and deliberate, as though every action was practiced and purposeful. Samuel watched her silently, feeling a growing respect for her skill and composure. He knew that the canyon ahead would not be easy. Narrow paths wound between steep cliffs, and rocks often fell without warning. Predators, though rarely seen, were known to roam the area at night. Samuel adjusted the harness on the horses and checked the cart carefully. The woman noticed him checking the harness and gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging that she had observed him. It was a small gesture, but to Samuel, it felt like an unspoken agreement of cooperation and awareness. As they began the day's journey, the sun rose higher, casting light across the rugged landscape. The woman walked beside the cart, her eyes scanning the terrain, noting every change in the path. Occasionally, she would crouch and examine a plant or rock formation, as if reading the land like a book. Samuel realized that she possessed a deep knowledge of the environment, an understanding that went far beyond simple survival. She knew where water could be found, how to avoid hidden dangers, and how to read subtle signs in the landscape that most people would miss. Hours passed with little conversation. Samuel focused on guiding the horses and monitoring the path, but he also observed her. She moved with confidence, her steps careful and measured. He noticed her attention to detail, the way she adjusted the cart slightly to avoid uneven ground, and how she communicated with small gestures that guided the horses. Each action demonstrated her intelligence and experience, and Samuel felt increasingly certain that the danger people had warned him about was not in her actions, but in the misunderstanding of her character. Around midday, they reached a small clearing with a shallow stream. Samuel decided they should take a break to water the horses and eat a light meal. The woman approached the stream first, bending down to drink carefully while keeping an eye on the surrounding area. She then checked the horses, patting them gently and speaking softly to calm them. Samuel observed her in silence, impressed by the balance of strength and care she displayed. During the break, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "The rocks ahead may be loose. Be careful with the cart." Her warning was simple, but it carried weight. Samuel realized that she was not only aware of the danger, but capable of anticipating it. He nodded in agreement, replying, "I see them." "Thank you." He felt a strange sense of gratitude, not just for her help, but for the way she shared knowledge without arrogance or anger. After the break, they continued. The path narrowed further, and Samuel guided the horses carefully over rocky terrain. At one point, a loose rock shifted under the cart, sending it wobbling dangerously. The woman reacted immediately, stepping forward to stabilize it with her strength and presence. Samuel felt a surge of relief as the cart regained balance. He realized then that he could not have managed this alone. Her skill, calmness, and quick thinking had saved them both from harm. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Samuel thought about the journey so far. He had been hired to guard her, to treat her as a prisoner, but each hour spent together had shown him a different truth. She was not reckless, violent, or dangerous in the way the traders had warned. She was strong, intelligent, and capable, but more than that, she was human. She had survived in harsh conditions, faced challenges with courage, and maintained dignity in the face of judgment. Samuel felt the weight of the injustice she had endured and began to consider the possibility that he could do more than just guard her. He could help her. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a small canyon where the path became steeper and more treacherous. Samuel guided the horses slowly, using every ounce of his knowledge to keep them steady. The woman walked beside the cart, observing each step and occasionally pointing out small hazards he might have missed. Her presence was steadying, and Samuel realized that he had begun to rely on her guidance, not just her compliance. As they paused to rest at the top of the canyon, Samuel looked at her closely for the first time in a while. She was breathing steadily, her face calm and focused. There was no fear in her eyes, only awareness and intelligence. He thought about the people who had called her dangerous and realized how wrong they had been. The real danger had not been in her, but in the misunderstanding, fear, and prejudice of those around her. That night, they made camp in a sheltered area near a small grove of trees. Samuel gathered wood for a fire while the woman checked the horses and prepared a simple place for them to rest. They shared a quiet meal, the fire casting warm light on their faces. Samuel could feel the tension of the journey melting slightly in the presence of her calm and steady energy. As they sat by the fire, he spoke quietly, careful not to alarm her. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what I am supposed to do with you, about the task I was given." The woman looked at him, her eyes attentive but calm, waiting for him to continue. "I realize now that the danger others spoke of is not in you. It is in the way people judge without knowing, in the way fear can create enemies where none exist." He paused, unsure how much to reveal, but something in him compelled him to speak the truth. "I don't think it is right to keep you chained, to send you away where you do not belong." The woman did not respond immediately, but her expression softened slightly. She seemed to consider his words carefully. Samuel continued, "I want you to know that I will not treat you as a prisoner. I will do my best to keep you safe, yes, but I will not harm you or force you to go where you do not want." For the first time, a small smile appeared on her face, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. It was a smile of acknowledgement, of understanding. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and determination. He had taken a step toward trust, and she had recognized it. The night passed with quiet vigilance. Both remained alert, knowing that the path ahead was uncertain. Samuel slept lightly, dreams filled with the rugged landscape and the woman's calm presence. He thought about the journey still to come, the dangers of the canyon, and the long miles of desert beyond. But he also thought about the possibility of helping her, not as a prisoner, but as someone who deserved freedom and dignity. When the first light of dawn appeared, Samuel rose to prepare for the next leg of the journey. He observed her quietly, noting how she had already begun tending to the horses, ensuring everything was ready. There was no fear in her movements, no doubt, only confidence and focus. Samuel felt a deep respect for her and a growing determination to act rightly. As they moved onward, the path became more challenging. Loose rocks and narrow trails required careful attention. Samuel guided the horses slowly, but he also relied on her observations. She pointed out subtle hazards he might have missed, and together they navigated the difficult terrain. Samuel realized that the journey was no longer just about reaching the destination. It was about cooperation, respect, and understanding. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the canyon. The view was breathtaking, with rolling hills and distant mountains bathed in sunlight. Samuel took a moment to rest and appreciate the landscape, and he noticed that she did the same. For a brief moment, the journey's hardships felt distant, replaced by the quiet beauty of the land. As they continued, Samuel's thoughts returned to the responsibility he had accepted. He had been paid to guard her, but he now understood that true responsibility went beyond obedience to orders. It required judgment, empathy, and courage. He realized that he would need to make a choice, one that could change both their lives. The thought was both daunting and clear. He could no longer ignore the truth he had seen. She deserved freedom, and he would find a way to ensure it. The day ended with another small camp by a shaded stream. Samuel and the woman tended to the horses, shared a simple meal, and prepared for the night. The bond between them had grown, unspoken but undeniable. Samuel felt the weight of the journey, the challenges ahead, and the decisions he would need to make. But he also felt a growing confidence in their ability to face what was coming together. As darkness fell, he sat by the fire, watching her move quietly around the camp. Her strength, intelligence, and dignity were clear in every action. Samuel knew that the journey was far from over, but he also knew something important. He could no longer see her as a prisoner. She was someone to respect, to protect, and perhaps to help. The stars appeared overhead, filling the sky with light. Samuel reflected on the day's events, the small moments of trust, and the growing understanding between them. He realized that courage was not always shown through force. It could be shown through patience, observation, and the choice to do what was right. He had witnessed her courage firsthand, and it had changed him. The night passed quietly, with the fire burning low and the wind whispering through the trees. Samuel knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, but he also knew that they were not alone. Together they had faced the land, its dangers and its hardships. Together they would continue, learning from each other, trusting each other, and moving toward a goal that had become more than mere survival. It had become freedom. The morning air was cool and quiet, carrying the faint scent of wild grass and the distant smell of wet earth from a stream. Samuel woke early, as he always did, and carefully observed the woman. She was already awake, sitting quietly by the horses, her posture relaxed yet alert. Her eyes scanned the horizon, noting every small detail, the shape of distant rocks, the movement of birds, even the rustle of leaves in the wind. Samuel could not help but admire her. Each day spent with her strengthened his understanding of her intelligence, patience, and resilience. He adjusted the harnesses, checked the horses' hooves, and ensured the cart was balanced. The canyon ahead would be more difficult than the previous ones. Narrow paths wound dangerously along cliffs, rocks were loose underfoot, and the slightest misstep could cause a fall. Samuel felt a knot of concern in his stomach, but the woman's calm presence gave him confidence. She noticed him watching her and offered a small nod. It was subtle, but it carried meaning, an acknowledgement of partnership and understanding. As they began their journey, Samuel kept the horses steady while the woman walked beside the cart, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain. Occasionally, she would bend down to examine a rock or check the soil, predicting where the cart could slip or where a hidden hazard might lie. Her actions were deliberate and confident. Samuel realized again how wrong the traders had been to call her dangerous. The true danger, if there was any, lay in misjudgment, fear, and ignorance, not in her careful, intelligent approach to survival. Around mid-morning, a sudden sound echoed from above the cliffs. Loose rocks tumbled down, startling the horses. Samuel quickly grabbed the reins, keeping them calm, but the woman acted instantly, stepping forward and using her strength to steady the cart. She guided the horses with quiet, precise gestures, showing skill and awareness that Samuel could only admire. He felt relief wash over him. Without her presence, the small tumble could have ended badly. After a tense few minutes, they continued. The canyon narrowed further, the walls rising high on either side. The sun beat down on them, casting sharp shadows across the rocks. Samuel could feel the heat on his back, but he did not complain. Every step was important. Every movement mattered. The woman walked beside the cart, her eyes alert, noticing changes in the path that he might have missed. She was patient and careful, and Samuel realized that he had begun to depend on her guidance as much as she depended on him for the horses. By midday, they reached a small plateau where a shallow stream cut through the rock. Samuel led the horses to the water while the woman moved to inspect the area. She found tracks, signs of wild animals and perhaps travelers who had passed through days before. She pointed them out to Samuel quietly, explaining how the tracks indicated movement and timing. Samuel nodded, impressed not only by her knowledge but by the careful way she shared it. There was no arrogance, no unnecessary explanation, just simple, useful observation. They rested briefly, allowing the horses to drink and eat, and Samuel prepared a light meal. The woman watched quietly, occasionally helping to hold the horses steady. When he offered her food, she shook her head politely, but the small gestures she made to help without asking for anything in return spoke volumes. Samuel realized that their relationship had shifted. What had started as a task of duty had begun to grow into something different, a bond built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. As they continued, the terrain became more challenging. Loose rocks, uneven ground, and narrow ledges required constant attention. Samuel guided the horses carefully, his heart beating faster with each step. The woman moved beside him, guiding him with small adjustments and careful observation. He realized that she was not just a survivor, she was a master of the land, someone who had learned to read the earth, the air, and the water with precision. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the canyon. Samuel and the woman stopped to rest near a rocky outcrop that offered some shelter from the sun. He watched her tend to the horses and the small supplies, her movements steady and deliberate. There was a quiet strength in her, a calm confidence that Samuel had come to admire deeply. He began to see her not as a prisoner, but as a person who deserved freedom, respect, and the chance to live without being judged unfairly. That night they set up a small camp in a secluded area protected by rocks and trees. Samuel gathered firewood while the woman prepared a place for the horses. The fire crackled, casting warm light on their faces. Samuel felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to follow the task he had been paid for, but to act rightly. He thought about the injustice she had suffered, the fear and misunderstanding she had faced, and the simple truth he had come to recognize. She was not dangerous. She was strong, intelligent, and human. As the night deepened, Samuel spoke quietly, careful not to startle her. "I've been thinking about what I am supposed to do with you," he said. "I realize now that the danger people spoke of is not real. You are not what they say you are." She looked at him, her eyes calm but attentive, listening to his words. "I don't think it is right to keep you chained or send you away where you do not belong. I will do my best to keep you safe, but I will not treat you as a prisoner. You deserve more than that." His words were honest, and though he did not know what she thought, he could see a subtle acknowledgement in her gaze. For the first time, there was a quiet understanding between them. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and determination. The night passed with vigilance. Both remained alert, aware that the journey ahead would grow more difficult. Samuel could not shake the thought of freedom for her. He had been hired to guard her, but he now understood that true responsibility required courage, judgment, and morality. He could no longer ignore what he knew to be right. By dawn, Samuel had made a silent plan. He would continue the journey, observing her closely, learning from her, and preparing for the moment when he could act to help her. The challenges ahead were real: the canyon, the harsh sun, and the long distance. But he also knew that he could no longer see her as a prisoner. She was someone to protect, respect, and guide toward freedom. The fourth day began with careful navigation of rocky cliffs and narrow paths. The woman walked beside the cart, offering subtle guidance and advice. Samuel noticed how she anticipated hazards, pointing out loose rocks and suggesting safer steps. Her presence was calming, and he realized that their success depended on cooperation and trust. He had come to rely on her wisdom and skill, and she, in turn, seemed to respect his decisions and guidance. As the day wore on, the heat grew intense, and the path became even more difficult. Loose stones shifted beneath the horses' hooves, and Samuel had to be constantly alert. The woman remained composed, observing everything and making small adjustments to keep the cart steady. Samuel realized again that the danger people had warned about was not in her, but in their own fear and ignorance. She was not only capable of surviving the land, she was capable of leading and guiding others through it safely. By late afternoon, they reached a small grove of trees that offered shade and water. Samuel allowed the horses to rest and drank from the stream himself, feeling relief in the cool water. The woman checked the area for threats, ensuring that no wild animals or other travelers were nearby. Her careful, methodical approach gave him confidence. He knew that if any danger arose, she would respond quickly and effectively. That night by the fire, Samuel spoke again, this time with more conviction. "I know the path ahead will be dangerous," he said, "but I am beginning to realize something important. You are not a prisoner. You are someone who deserves freedom, someone who should not be judged by fear or misunderstanding. I want to help you if I can." The woman did not respond with words, but her eyes softened slightly, and she nodded in acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but Samuel recognized it as acceptance, an understanding that he could act rightly without betraying her trust. As the stars appeared overhead, Samuel reflected on the journey so far. The landscape had been harsh, the path difficult, but he had learned much, not just about survival, but about courage, morality, and the power of trust. The woman had shown him strength, intelligence, and dignity that no payment or warning could measure. He realized that the journey was no longer just about following orders or completing a task. It was about doing what was right, protecting someone unjustly judged, and finding a way to help her achieve the freedom she deserved. The decision weighed heavily on him, but it was clear. He could not continue to see her as a prisoner. He would need to act carefully and wisely, but he would act to give her the chance to live freely. The night passed quietly. Samuel and the woman maintained their vigilance, listening to the sounds of the land, the wind in the trees, the distant calls of animals, the rustle of leaves in the darkness. Samuel felt a growing determination. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer just a guard. He was a protector, an observer, and someone willing to do what was right. By dawn, the 5th day of travel loomed ahead. The canyon stretched before them, filled with new challenges, narrow paths, and hidden dangers. But Samuel felt ready. He had learned from the woman, observed her skill, and recognized the injustice of her captivity. He knew the path ahead would test him, but he also knew that he would face it with courage, morality, and a determination to help her achieve the freedom she deserved. The day ended with quiet reflection, the fire burning low and the stars overhead. Samuel felt the weight of responsibility, the challenges ahead, and the growing bond of trust. He knew that the moment to act would come soon, and he was preparing himself carefully, watching, learning, and waiting for the right opportunity. The morning broke over the canyon with a soft golden light. Samuel rose early, his mind focused and steady. He knew the day ahead would be the most important of the entire journey. The narrow path before them was more dangerous than anything they had faced so far, with steep cliffs, loose rocks, and deep ravines. The horses shifted nervously beneath him, sensing the tension in the air. Samuel took a deep breath and prepared himself. He had watched the woman carefully for days, learning her movements, her instincts, and her intelligence. Now he had to put his plan into action. The woman moved beside the cart, as always, calm and aware. She did not speak, but her eyes followed every motion. Samuel knew that she trusted him, even without words, and that trust gave him courage. He gently loosened one of the leather bindings that held her hands, careful not to alarm her. She looked at him with sharp, questioning eyes, but did not resist. She understood, perhaps even sensed, what he intended. As they carefully navigated the narrow path, a sudden sound made both of them freeze. Rocks shifted high above, and a small landslide threatened the cart. Samuel acted quickly, guiding the horses to safer ground while the woman steadied the cart with her strength and balance. Together, they avoided disaster, their movements smooth, coordinated, and practiced. Samuel realized in that moment how much he depended on her, just as she had likely depended on him for the past days. By mid-morning, they reached a secluded part of the canyon where the path widened slightly. Samuel stopped the cart and dismounted quietly. He looked at the woman and she met his gaze, calm and steady. He spoke softly, explaining the plan. "We will leave the path here," he said. "It is risky, but it is our best chance. You will be free if we make it." She nodded slightly, her eyes showing determination and trust. Samuel unhooked the cart carefully, keeping the horses calm. He knew that once they left the path, there would be no turning back. The canyon walls were high, the land unfamiliar, and any mistake could be dangerous. But he had planned for this, studied the terrain, and relied on the woman's instincts and skills. They began to move along a hidden path Samuel had noticed earlier. It was narrow and overgrown, but it offered cover and safety from any travelers or authorities that might be on the main route. The woman walked beside him, alert and careful, her eyes scanning the rocks and ground ahead. Samuel felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Every step brought them closer to freedom, but also closer to potential danger. As they moved through the hidden path, a sudden sound made Samuel's heart race. Voices echoed faintly from the main canyon trail, travelers possibly searching for them. He motioned to the woman to keep low, and they moved quickly but silently, using the rocks and trees for cover. The horses followed closely, guided by gentle commands and careful nudges. The tension was high, but the coordination between them was seamless. Hours passed as they carefully navigated the hidden path. The sun climbed high, and the heat pressed down, but neither Samuel nor the woman faltered. She occasionally pointed out loose rocks, uneven ground, or hidden dips, and he adjusted their path accordingly. Samuel realized that their partnership had become more than necessity. It was trust, respect, and understanding. They moved as one, each aware of the other's strength and intelligence. By late afternoon, the hidden path opened into a small, secluded valley surrounded by high rocks and trees. Samuel knew this was the place. The woman stopped, looking around carefully, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Samuel relaxed slightly, feeling relief and hope. This valley offered safety and cover, a place where she could disappear and live freely among the land. He turned to her, speaking softly. "This is it," he said. "You can stay here safe and no one will find you. You are free." The woman looked at him with a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and understanding. She nodded, stepping forward to inspect the area. The horses moved freely, and Samuel gave them a gentle pat. They spent a quiet moment together, acknowledging the end of the journey and the start of her freedom. Samuel felt a mixture of pride and relief. He had been paid to guard her, but he had chosen to act rightly. He had taken a risk, but the reward was worth it, freedom for someone unjustly labeled and confined. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said simply. Samuel nodded, understanding that words were not needed beyond that. The journey had shown them both courage, trust, and respect. She had survived harsh lands, danger, and misunderstanding, and now she could live as she chose. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold, Samuel prepared the horses for departure. He knew he could not stay, but he felt content. The woman would remain in this safe place, her freedom secured by his careful planning and courage. He looked at her one last time, seeing strength, intelligence, and resilience in her eyes. She gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and understanding. Samuel began the journey back along the hidden path, retracing his steps carefully to avoid leaving any trace that could lead others to her. The canyon was still dangerous, but he moved with confidence, knowing the woman was safe. Each step reminded him of the lessons he had learned, the value of observation, patience, courage, and moral choice. By nightfall, Samuel reached a familiar ridge overlooking the canyon. He paused to look back, knowing that she was now free. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of the valley below. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had shown him the importance of doing what is right, even when it is difficult or risky. As he descended the ridge toward his own path home, Samuel reflected on the days they had spent together. He had been hired to watch over someone considered dangerous, but he had discovered courage, intelligence, and humanity in the woman. He had learned that strength does not always show itself through force, and that true danger often lies in misunderstanding and fear, not in those who are different. By the time he reached the edge of the canyon and familiar trails, Samuel felt a sense of peace. The woman was safe, free, and capable of living her life on her own terms. He had acted with courage, wisdom, and integrity, and the reward was more than coins or payment. It was the knowledge that he had done the right thing. The stars appeared overhead, and Samuel paused one last time. He thought of the woman, her calm strength, and her sharp mind. He knew she would survive, thrive, and perhaps even teach others the lessons he had learned from her. As he continued his journey home, he felt changed, stronger, wiser, and more aware of the true meaning of responsibility, courage, and freedom. When Samuel finally reached his own small camp by the edge of the plains, he reflected quietly. The journey had tested him in ways he had not expected. Through danger, moral choices, and observation of someone he had initially seen as a prisoner. But he had learned that courage is not always loud and freedom is not always given. It must sometimes be earned, protected, and guided with care. He sat quietly by his own fire, watching the night sky, thinking of the woman in the valley below. She was free, safe, and alive. He had been paid to guard her, but he had chosen to do what was right. And in doing so, he had freed not only her, but a part of himself, the part that understood courage, morality, and the power of respect. Samuel finally rested, knowing that the woman was safe, and that the canyon, the land, and their journey had left both of them stronger and wiser. The night was quiet, filled with stars, and the wind whispered through the trees. Freedom had been won, not easily but justly. And in that quiet moment, Samuel understood that sometimes the right choice is the hardest, but also the most rewarding.